Now, having said all this and giving you this picture, I would like to add something else. That the ruling class rules, but it doesn't rule quite in the way it wants to. That in fact, we must not be overwhelmed by these facts or this analysis, but we must be enlightened. We could understand why they do these things. Ronald Reagan is not stupid. He gets confused. He goes to Ecuador and says, it's wonderful being here in Colombia. You know, I mean, he does things like that, and he muffles on questions. Reagan, though, has been the most successful and rational and persistent president that I have ever seen in office in every single area, whether it's NLRB or busting unions or cutting human services or his treatment of the environment, he is, or defense spending or foreign policy. He has advanced, or the appointment of reactionary judges. Every single area, defunding the left, whatever. He has not left a stone unturned. He has advanced and pushed persistently. He has a cohesive goal and program. It's the goal of Cap Weinberger and Pat Buchanan. It's the goal of the radical right. And he has been rather successful at it, but not completely. Because at the same time, in the years that Reagan has been in office, the protest has grown. Democratic forces have grown. Changes continue throughout the world. Peace forces in the Soviet Union. By the way, there are massive peace forces. Millions of people marched. The Leningrad Peace Committee. There were photos of these people marching with these banners. No missiles east or west. And again, you should make a distinction between a country which supports and encourages a massive peace movement and a government like ours which derides it, red baits it, ignores it, or puts it down. A nuclear freeze movement. Democratic forces have grown in power since Vietnam. Do you realize that Ronald Reagan has not invaded Nicaragua? I mean, do you realize, as I said before, that the United States has invaded Nicaragua 11 times and has actually occupied Nicaragua 3 times, including for periods of as much as 10 or 13 years, and the Marines went in there and burnt huts and killed people and raped and murdered and dismembered people? Coleman McCarthy just had a column in the Washington Post of a 78-year-old guy who said, I was in there when we were fighting Sandino back in 1928, and when I got out as a young kid, I had nightmares for years after. I shot innocent people. We saw guys getting their genitals cut off and tortured. The Marines did that. Do you realize that? Do you realize today the United States has a striking power, a deployment power, a force, a delivery power that's 1,000 times more powerful than anything Calvin Coolidge had? And you got a president that's 1,000 times nuttier than Calvin Coolidge, who would like to go in there, who wants to go in, and yet he hasn't? Well, what's held him back? It's the democratic forces. It's the same thing that kept Nixon from using nuclear weapons in Vietnam, as the story came out when the Pentagon Papers were released, or not the Pentagon Papers, the White House tapes, where they were afraid of what the disruption and the reaction of the people in their own country. It's the democratic forces in this country, it's the democratic forces around the world, it's the Nicaraguan people who are armed and ready. He could go in and carpet bomb it with B-52s, not lose a single man, and just devastate it and destroy it. But then he would have to go in with troops. Like that line in Antigone, you know, you would make of it a graveyard and call it peace. But those troops would still find survivors, and they would have to fight them. And there would be unacceptable losses. And Americans would die in Nicaragua. And the war might escalate. And all over Latin America, people might rise up. Why do you think those Latin American leaders, those corrupt, rich, comprador, collaborationist leaders, say to Ronald Reagan, we don't want you in Nicaragua, we oppose that policy, we support the Contrador program? Are they suddenly going left on us? No, they're worried about the reaction of their own people. The losses in Nicaragua would be unacceptable, but unacceptable to whom? Not to Ronald Reagan. He wouldn't mind losing 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 American boys if he can take Nicaragua. That's no loss to him. He's got plenty of fodder. He's got it right in this room. He'll have you down there. He had 261 Marines blown away in Lebanon in one day, and he wanted to go back in with more and fight more. Those were acceptable losses to him. That was no skin off his nose. It's his class interests he's worrying about. He kept talking about the emergence of a Lebanese left and Lebanese socialism, and we must stop it. It was unacceptable losses politically That means that there are political forces that can fight back. That it's too costly to him, not morally. So, we may be stronger than we think. And we must never believe what they try to make us believe about ourselves, that we're weak, that we don't have it, you see. Let me just close with one last little story, okay? Because I've been going too long. I've lived in Washington. I was living in Washington for about 6 years, and I was asked by some Filipino exiles in 1981, I think it was, or 82, to go speak at Lafayette Park. At the White House is right across the street from Lafayette Park. I always tell friends, I speak at the White House a lot. And I have a big megaphone, and I speak at the White House. I say, you speak at the White House? Yes, I speak at the White House. With these microphones. And so there I was, speaking, you know. And these Filipinos were so appreciative, it was so moving to me. Oh, Michael Parenti, would you speak? And so I give this speech and I talk about the Philippines. What I said to you, the Philippines are not a poor country. Only the people are poor. It's rich and they should deserve their own heritage, blah, blah, blah. And I said this whole thing and on. And here's this little band, about 200 people, about half Filipino, half American. And you know, and I look at this, and then I look across at the White House, and you know what I see? I see about 600 police. Their helmets, their guns, rockets, fists, everything, cars, whoop, whoop, all this stuff, all over there. And I see limousines, a fleet of limousines comes up. It's Marcos, President Marcos, coming up to the White House porch. You can't see the actual porch, it's blocked off, but you can see the limousines go up there to get hugged and kissed by Ronnie Reagan, because he's a great defender of democracy, this Marcos. And I see this, and I see all this display of power. And I see these Filipino heavies, the securities, they come around, they're looking at the Filipinos, like checking them out. They recognize anybody. You know. And I'm standing there with our little, brave little band of 200 people with our signs, and we're walking around chanting. And I do what a lot of people do in this situation. I start to bleed inside. I start to say, my God, look at that power, look at that wealth, look at the force. And we got this little band of people, you know. And then after I gave my talk, I wandered over to, we had a fence up and we had a display of pictures of Filipinos who have been tortured and found dead, grisly photos by the Marcos people. And a Marcos security guy, a Filipino thug, plain clothes, comes walking up, and he looks at the pictures, standing next to me, and he goes, and he sort of smirks, like, you know. And I never had such a feeling. I wanted to really, you know, give him one upside his head, but I've outgrown those days. So. And I'm saying, look at this. They got it all. What are we going to do? And look what's happened 3 years later. Just look what's happened. This incredible transition. Democratic forces mobilized. And this Marcos just blown away. Just remember who has the source of power. When the people get it together, they have a strength like nothing seen. When the democratic forces move, the forces of reaction must retreat. And these great generals and dictators and presidentes who sit there in their big palaces with their boodle and their corruption and their bayonets and their guns and their spies everywhere, they get thrown off just as a stallion would thrown off a little fly. So we speak truth to power. Just remember that. Speak truth to power. Mobilize, organize, never be sad. Remember what the great Italian communist Antonio Gramsci said, you have a pessimism of the mind, but an optimism of the will. You see the worst, you consider the worst, you work against it, but in here you work for what is freedom, for what is justice, for what is right. It is our destiny, it is our future. The future itself depends upon it. Thank you.